Turns out it's just fucking clam juice. The best way to bet the NFL is win totals. In this win projection series, you'll get to see the logic behind Big Ryan the Fat Guy's win total projections and how you can win whatever contest you decide to enter for the 2018 NFL season. Fat Guy, 2017, 6 wins for the Oakland Raiders. How did that season go?
I would like to congratulate you on getting it out first try despite reading it off a teleprompter. Now, 6 wins, that wasn't what the Oakland Raiders were looking for. Jack Del Rio and company, they got the boot because 6 wins isn't going to cut it with the type of talent the Raiders allegedly have.
Allegedly, they made a coaching change to John Gruden. I've heard this name before. I can't put a face to it, though. The guy won 95 games about, 15 years ago. He's lost 81 for a 54% winning percentage. Do you think he's going to make him any better?
Well, if you can't remember what he looks like, just think of serial killer child's doll, and then you'll definitely put the pieces together.
Then I'll get a boner.
Now, John Gruden's been on a hiatus, but he hasn't been away from football commentating on Thursday night games for anyone who's watched any sort of games at all in the last, 8-9 years. So he signed this ridiculous 10-year contract for, over $100 million? So I guess that's the only way you could lure him back. So maybe he's going to bring back some of the magic he had with the Raiders of old in the early 2000s.
And at offensive coordinator, they have Greg Olsen, not the tight end.
Greg Olsen, former quarterbacks coach of the LA Rams just last year. He kind of came out of the woodwork. He left a decent job. I guess he's getting a boost in pay probably, and he's going to get more responsibility being the offensive coordinator of the Oakland Raiders. But it feels like Gruden is able to pull out a lot of different people from a lot of different areas. Seems like he's got connects in the NFL coaching realm.
Speaking of John Gruden, don't you feel like the guy he did play-by-play with had a crush on him?
It's possible, man. Maybe he's just jealous of his sweet hairline.
And at defensive coordinator, they add in Paul Guenther.
Paul Guenther of the Cincinnati Bengals. Bengals always had solid defenses, so Guenther should have, at least a little bit of success with this Raiders group. I mean, there is some talent there. Guenther coached in Cincinnati with John Gruden's brother Jay, who will probably be joining him if he doesn't have a good year in Washington.
So for notable player additions, let's start off at running back where they add in Doug Martin.
Everyone knows who Doug Martin is, who's had a fantasy team. Doug Martin, decent player, muscle hamster. It depends which Doug Martin's going to show up and whether he has PEDs or not.
And despite having maybe the best nickname in football, he still hates it. And at wide receiver, they added a bunch of familiar names. Let's start off with the most familiar for anybody, and that's wide receiver Jordy Nelson from the Packers.
Jordy Nelson, Green Bay Packers, lost a step, had some injuries. I'm not sure how much gas he has left in the tank. We're going to have to see. But it's going to be a little bit more difficult catching balls from Derek Carr as opposed to Aaron Rodgers.
And quite the opposite from Jordy Nelson. They add wide receiver Martavis Bryant from Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Martavis Smoke Bryant. Now, if he can keep his nose and his lungs clean for a year, I'd be surprised. He's a fantastic player when he wants to be and when he's sober.
And at wide receiver / really a special team specialist, Dwayne Harris.
Dwayne Harris got the sick dreadlocks, played for a variety of teams, should be returning kicks, although I can't see him being much better than Cordarrelle Patterson, who they just let go, so we're going to have to see. But, I mean, it's just a plug and play. He'll get some snaps. He'll be okay.
And at right tackle, they added in first-round pick Colton Miller as well as veteran Breno Giacomini.
Breno Giacomini became a turnstile later in his career, so I'm not necessarily sure he's going to make the team. I doubt he starts. He'll be a rotational piece for sure if he does make it. Colton Miller was a first-round pick that a lot of people poo-pooed in this recent draft, but again, I'm not going to rip on any of the rookies. I don't know what Reggie McKenzie saw. No one else does. There might be something there, so we're just going to have to wait and see what happens, and then we can criticize afterwards.
And even if Colton Miller falls on his face, they do have Breno who can jump in, or they have third-round pick Brandon Parker, who's also a tackle. So another guy who might be able to play.
But I like that bad boy Denver Kirkland. Not just because he has a smooth-ass name, but because he can really push the pile.
He really can push the pile. At tight end, they add in Derek Carrier.
Derek Carrier, just a ho-hum tight end. I believe played for the San Francisco 49ers. Does have some offensive upside. Probably be used in blocking packages, I imagine, in conjunction with Lee Smith.
Onto the defensive side of the ball. At defensive end, they've added in Tank Carradine as well as defensive end Armonte Bryant.
Tank Carradine, also I believe from the San Francisco 49ers, and Armonte Bryant, the oft-troubled youth who showed promise as a 7th-round pick for the Cleveland Browns and then went on to Detroit. Able to rack up sacks in some games, but always seems to get in trouble. So another bad boy for the Raiders, and it just seems fitting. It's a Pirate winter.
Now let's go into all these veteran linebackers and corners and safeties they've added. At linebacker, Tahir Whitehead.
Another Detroit boy, okay.
Emmanuel Lemur.
I believe came from Minnesota. If you can't cut it in Minnesota, that's okay. Their defense is awesome. But again, I'm not really sure how any of these pieces are going to work out.
And one of our favorites, linebacker Derek Johnson.
DJ, the years have not necessarily been kind to him as of late. He's been hurt a bunch over the last few years. I hate harping on injuries, but that's the truth of the matter. And he's a little bit older too, so I'm not really sure with these signings. I don't have a good outlook of how they're going to be. They signed a bunch of veterans all over 30. I guess that's over the hill for the NFL. So it's really tough to predict the future when it comes to this team and the route that they're going, because they're either really old or they're really young. So I'm a little bit confused with the style of the Raiders this coming off season.
At cornerback, I'll just list all these guys off quickly. Leon Hall, Sharice Wright, Rashawn Melvin, and Senquez Golson. Most notably, Leon Hall is coming over, most likely with Paul Gunther, coming from that Cincinnati system.
Yeah, and he's starting, and he was kind of almost the 4th corner in Cincinnati, so he became expendable. I'm not sure how well an old corner is going to do in the NFL, especially playing for the Oakland Raiders. It's just really tough to play corner when you're really past your prime.
And it looks like Sharice Wright is going to be jumping in at that nickel back position.
He came from Buffalo. At least that's a good secondary to come from.
And at safety, the last guy they added was Marcus Gilchrist.
Marcus Gilchrist, a Charger, or Gilchrist? I don't know. Depending on how theological you are, you'd want to enunciate that differently. Coming over from the Chargers, no real opinion, just a guy to me.
So for guys who they lost, let's start at fullback / running back, Jamiz Olawale.
I actually really like him, and that's a fullback. It's so weird to say, I really like a fullback, but I really did like him.
At running back, Elijah Wood.
Yeah, whatever.
Wide receiver, Michael Crabtree, and kick return specialist, Cordarrelle Patterson.
I don't know, it seems like a big loss, but on paper, it should be an upgrade with Martavis Bryant and Jordy Nelson.
Yeah, it's tough losing Crabtree. I feel like he's disrespected by a lot of people in this league, and he's been quite a good player, at least for the last few years.
Yeah, they keep snatching his chain, dog.
They do keep snatching his chain. They also lost tight end Clive Walford.
Yeah, they added Derek Carrier, so I'm going to call it a wash, even though I like Clive Walford.
I do like Clive Walford quite a bit, so hopefully he goes on to success with this next team. At tackle, they lost Marshall Newhouse.
Oh, weird. He moved on to another team. I can distinctly remember him getting completely ripped on as a Packer by John Gruden in the commentating booth, so this doesn't really surprise me. I'd imagine that's the case with a lot of these players.
And at linebacker, they lost Aldon Smith.
God, man, this guy was like the best in the league for the 49ers. He was so good. But that guy likes drinking and eating more than I do, so he just ran out of chances. I really think he's a really exceptionally talented football player. His knuckles drag on the ground. He's got the longest arms I've ever seen. Great closing speed. Fantastic linebacker. Just, one of those wasted potential tragedies. I love Aldon Smith. Wish you well, bro. But this is a long time coming.
There's only 2 things that can hold Aldon Smith back, and that's a tree or a wall. And at cornerback, they've lost David Amerson and Sean Smith.
Well, David Amerson was like a surprise fit when he came from Washington, and then shit really trailed off. And now Sean Smith, he played fantastic for the Chiefs, but he has not played fantastic for the Raiders, getting burned on a regular basis. This doesn't surprise me, but they haven't exactly upgraded. I mean, they do have the first-round corner, Gary Conley, who pretty much redshirted last year by only playing 2 games. So maybe that's where they're going to try some of their power. But this secondary as a whole just doesn't look good.
And a notable loss at punter, who we don't usually talk about too much, is Marquette King, ya boy.
Marquette King, most notably for turning a fumbled snap against the Jacksonville Jaguars into a 25-yard gain, also posting the fastest running speed of any player that week.
That's unbelievable.
Which is really bizarre for a punter. He kind of sticks out cosmetically when you think of punters, so maybe that's why his athleticism eclipses the other punters in his class. He's got a great leg, and he's got great dance moves, but great dance moves equals bad attitude. I don't think it's going to work with John Gruden's group.
As Deion Sanders would say, he's fast for his position. Enough of all these player additions and subtractions. Let's go over the actual roster. Who's going to be playing? At quarterback, it is Derek Carr's team.
Yeah, I mean, he just kind of played average last year. I feel like they're going to simplify the offense, the way they have it set up to pretty much play out of the eye, or single back. Like, they're going to make it a little bit easier for him. So I do expect a little bit of a bump, but I don't expect him to play as well as he did 2 years ago when they went 10-6, I believe, to win the division and then play the Houston Texans. Or no, wild card in and play the Houston Texans.
And at running back, they have the timeless wonder Marshawn Lynch, as well as Doug Martin, Jalen Richard, and DeAndre Washington.
I thought Marshawn Lynch's effort last year sucked. And then when they had that argument with the Chiefs, he protected Marcus Peters rather than his whole team. I really didn't like his attitude or his work ethic last year. It just kind of looked shitty, to be perfectly honest. I owned him in a couple fantasy leagues, and I was sorely disappointed. He just didn't really play well. I'm not sure he's going to play well this year either, but he'll surely get the boot if he doesn't, because I think this is a no-nonsense regime. Doug Martin, he's getting a second chance, so he could definitely take over the reins as the starting running back. Nothing would surprise me, definitely, with this group. Jalen Richard should be safe with his job. It seems like he's going to be the third down back, and perhaps even DeAndre Washington. All of these guys' roster spots are probably safe, but you could see Doug Martin conceivably take over in snaps.
Yeah, Marshawn taught us that blood is thicker than water. I'll mention it because you said they might play out of the eye. At fullback, they have Keith Smith, who will likely make the roster, or Ryan Juracek, a free agent from this year.
Ryan who? Yeah, whatever. They're going to play a fullback. I think so, at least. I just found it odd that they're going to release Jameez Olawale, who in the pantheon of fullbacks is really the guy I would want. But Keith Smith, shout out to San Jose State University. I hope he does well. Got a little athleticism there. He came from Dallas, I believe. And they definitely need a fullback in the system they're going to play, I believe at least.
And at wide receiver, it's highlighted by Amari Cooper going into his fourth year, I believe. Jordy Nelson, Martavis Bryant, Johnny Holton, Seth Roberts, Griff Whalen, Dwayne Harris. Not much else.
That's enough. Griff Whalen. He shows up on the rosters once in a while. Seth Roberts, who's awesome at either dropping the ball or catching and fumbling the ball, or holding it with one hand. I got a lot of gripes about Seth Roberts. He did have that one play against Tampa Bay in overtime that was awesome, but that's really all I can remember from him. Just think about it. If this was 3 years ago and you saw Amari Cooper, Jordy Nelson, and Martavis Bryant, you'd be salivating at the mouth. But this isn't the same group as 3 years ago. There's a lot of questions to be asked. Amari Cooper, who 3-4 years ago would be the worst of the three, is now clearly the best option out of the three. Cooper also had a down year last year, but there is potential for this wide receiver grouping. It's one of the better three in the NFL if you're able to squeeze out the last little juices that these guys got.
So offensive line, left to right, Donald Penn, Kelce Osemele, Rodney Hudson, Gabe Jackson, and most likely first-round pick Colton Miller.
Now this crew, last year I said should challenge for best offensive line in the league, and they certainly did not do that. They're all badasses. Like I don't get it. That's why I think they're going to play a lot of run plays and appease this offensive line because they can batter teams. These guys are all badasses. Penn is a badass. KO, Kalishi Osemele, one of the best guards in the league, signed from Baltimore. He is a badass. Rodney Hudson, center from Kansas City, free agent. He is a badass. Gabe Jackson, the only guy they drafted out of the people I just had mentioned. Second round pick, I believe.
Third round.
Third round. Okay, close enough. I'm allowed to be one off. You know, I haven't made a mistake ever on this thing. That's for sure. Now, Gabe Jackson, he's also a badass. Now, we're going to have to find out who's going to slot in at this right tackle position, which has always kind of been a weak spot for the Raiders. Now, my favorite thing that the Raiders used to do, and I'm hoping they bring it back, is they'd add a six-man at a tight end position. They'd add Denver Kirkland, which is a big bowl of weight. And remember them beating the Denver Broncos, only running 6 plays for the entire second half. If they can get back to that brand of football where they really just run it down your throat, they have two smashers in Lynch and Martin, who we mentioned previously. They should be able to play this brand of football. But will they do it? I'm not really sure what is going on with these Raiders.
I know you love that O-line, but I think you might like these tight ends even better. Tight end Jared Cook, tight end Derek Carrier, and blocking tight end Lee Smith.
Well, I wouldn't say I like them better. I like them. I mean, they're not amazing or anything. I like Jared Cook, though. I think he's underrated. That one catch he made for Green Bay against Dallas in the playoffs, oh, man, everyone remembers that. So good. Now, has Cook been, amazing in every year that he's played? No, but he's had a good career. He's not mentioned in the upper echelon of tight ends, but he has been decent. This is all they really need. A decent tight end, that's good. That's good enough. And all three of these tight ends can play. So you just got a lot of flexibility with how you're going to do things. I think they should be able to make it easier for Derek Carr.
Let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. Look at this defensive line, and just looking at this roster, you can tell they've made a key decision to improve the offensive and defensive lines by the draft. So at right tackle, Colton Miller, they added in the first round. In the second round, they added a nose tackle in P.J. Hall. In the third round, they added a defensive end in Arden Key. In the fifth round, they added another defensive end, Maurice Hurst, who's supposed to be quite the unreal player, but he has a heart condition, as well as this left tackle, Brandon Parker, in the third round. You can see they spent those first 5 rounds only drafting offensive and defensive linemen.
Well, anyone who really knows anything about football, the game is more or less won or lost in the trenches. That's where you need your strengths to be, and the Raiders have at least attempted to do so. The offensive line, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say it's shored up. This, on paper, should be a dominant force, but we're onto the defensive line, which isn't nearly as strong. Like you said, they did attempt by adding Maurice Hurst and P.J. Hall, but I'm not sure that's going to be enough. They do have a former Defensive Player of the Year in Khalil Mack. They also have Mario Edwards Jr., Eddie Vanderdoes. I'm just not sure if this defensive line is going to be up to snuff.
Other guys you didn't mention that I forgot to mention earlier are Justin Ellis, Tank Carradine, Atiba Rubin, Frosty Rucker.
Oh, man.
Oh, man is right. I'll just move on. Let's go to linebackers where they have Bruce Irvin, Tahir Whitehead, Emmanuel Lemur, Derek Johnson. That's pretty much it. They also have a 6th-round pick in Azim Victor and former Dallas Cowboy Kyle Wilbur.
The defensive line guys you named, even though their names sound like it was a reunion for the 1994 graduating class, they're absurdly old. It could work. You can be old and play, but it's just a lot harder. On to the linebackers that you just named. They're also just a pile of names. I'm not sure how well this is going to work. I always think Bruce Irvin is better than he is because he just seemed like a game wrecker in Seattle, where he just seems like he's just morphed into just a guy in Oakland. He was out of West Virginia. No one thought he'd be a first-round pick. Everyone was surprised at Seattle. And, he kind of earned his way, to be perfectly honest. Helped Seattle to a Super Bowl. That earned him a nice contract in Oakland. The guy has a lot of athleticism and a fuck of a lot of attitude if you've ever heard him speak. But I'm not sure how good this linebacking crew is going to be. Average at best would definitely be the way to go.
At cornerback, they have Garyon Conley, as well as adding Leon Hall. At nickelback, Sharice Wright. Other guys, depth guys, Dexter McDonald, 4th-round pick Nick Nelson, Rashawn Melvin, Daryl Worley. That's about it at corner.
Daryl Worley gets traded and gets drunk by the stadium in Philadelphia. Well, I'm sure that'll work out in Oakland. No one's ever been drunk there before. Now, this crew, it doesn't look like a good crew as well. Garyon Conley only played 2 games last year, so you really can't say one way or another. Gruden was recently quoted as saying he's a good player, but what does that mean? You could say that about anybody on your team, because if they're not a good player, they shouldn't really be on your roster in theory. He should be headlining this cornerback crew of hodgepodge old players and retreads. I'm really not confident in how well they're going to be at the cornerback position this year.
Speaking of drinking in Oakland, how much is a drink at a Raiders game?
Well, I did have the pleasure of going in the Black Hole, and there was nobody at the Tito's bar, and it was $45 for a double Caesar. And a Caesar, that's a national drink of Canada, way up here in the north where we are. So $45 American for a Caesar, that seems like a good deal. I only had 4 of them.
And at safety, they have Carl Joseph, Reggie Nelson, Marcus Gilchrist, and last year's 2nd-round pick in Obi Melifonwu.
Obi Melifonwu, kind of red-shirted, didn't play too much, was injured. I'm not really sure what's going to happen. I think there were some camp concerns about his availability too as well this year. So If he's starting from behind, it'll be tough for him to start. Carl Joseph, a former first-round pick, just seemed like a bat out of hell. I hope he turns into the big hitting Ronnie Lott that I hope that he could be, as if anything that I just said made any sense. Also, Reggie Nelson, another old Cincinnati guy, and I believe the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Paul Gunther's familiar with all these players, but they're just that much older. So I'm not really sure, again, what's going to happen. There's just all these old guys. Like, do they still have it? Like, why do you want to be slow in the secondary? I can understand offensive line. I can understand defensive line. Even then, defensive line, you don't want to be too old. But secondary, all these slow retreads, if they make it work, I'm going to be impressed. And I'm not really sure. They're definitely the mystery team of the year this year. So all the moves have been shrouded in secrecy, and we're not really sure the direction. And I'm not really sure the direction of this secondary, as well as with these safeties.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether this veteran team doesn't make mistakes and they just win football games. That might be the case. They might not blow anyone out, but they might be winning their games 17-14.
No mental mistakes. If there's no mental mistakes, I can conceivably understand that. But if you keep getting the top blown off because you can't backpedal, because you got arthritis in your feet from playing for 15 years, then we have a problem. So we're going to have to see.
So going into 2018, the over-under for the Oakland Raiders is 8.5 wins. We have them graded out as a C team and winning 8.45 games, so pretty much right on the nose.
Yeah, bouncing on my boys C all day, no big deal.
Hit the like button if you agree with Big Ryan the Fat Guy. Give us a comment below with how many games you think the Raiders will win next season. And subscribe for more non-sequiturs and NFL projections. What about that Andrew WK guy?